fires becomes more than a coincidence. People are dying, and the community is frightened. Detectives must work quickly to calm fears and catch the killer before he strikes again. At a crime scene, everything is considered a potential clue. But a fire can destroy everything in its path, challenging forensic investigators at every turn, and making each arson a trial by fire. Some of the names have been changed. 2:30 in the morning, November 25th, 1996. Most of La Crosse, Wisconsin slept. But one of its residents woke up to an alarming sight.
The neighbor's house is on fire? Was he accepted?
He noticed smoke pouring from his neighbor's house. Fire trucks raced to the scene, arriving moments later to find it consumed by flames. If anyone was home, firefighters feared they were trapped inside. La Crosse firefighter Dan Skiles knew he and his men had to get in quickly if they hoped to get anyone out alive. But there appeared to be no way in.
Door and pushing it open. I decided to sit down and use my leg to kick the door open.
Firefighter Skiles kicked open the door and discovered the floor of the kitchen completely destroyed by the fire. With no path to guide them, they relied on each other, making their way through the flames and looking for anyone who was trapped inside.
The person on the nozzle yelled out that he had a victim. We picked him up. I dragged him as far as I could before I ran out of air.
Despite their best efforts, firefighters pulled a man's lifeless body out of the burning rubble. It was the homeowner, 64-year-old Donald Parmasek. And firefighter Dan Skiles suspected something else was wrong.
Blood on his head, and I thought that was unusual for a victim in a house fire to have blood on him.
It was at that moment firefighters suspected they were dealing with something more than an accident. The body was transported to the morgue for autopsy. Once the fire department declared the house safe for entry, fire investigators went to work. Deputy Fire Marshal Gene Brink began the preliminary investigation to determine the fire's point of origin.
A fire investigator, in determining the cause of the fire, starts in the area of least damage, the outside of the house or the living room where there was no fire, and works back to the area of most damage.
The house was cluttered with books and magazines. Detectives opened them and found money hidden inside. But the victim's wallet was found empty on the table. As firefighters packed up, Fire Marshal Brink went down to the basement and inspected the debris, looking for some explanation for the blaze.
In our investigation, we determined that the fire had started in the basement. That's where the greatest burn had occurred. We found one area under the kitchen where the fire had burned on top of a pile of magazines. There was no heat-producing device in the area. We had a set fire at one particular place. This was an arson.
La Crosse arson investigators checked the outside find out who started the fire and why. They noticed a broken basement window. Investigators believe whoever started the fire may have entered through that window. In the snow, one of them discovered an undisturbed shoe print leading away from the house. Since it was dark, he covered the print with a metal trash can in order to preserve this possible clue. The medical examiner found deep circular wounds in the victim's skull. Now, along with arson, authorities believe they were also investigating a murder.
Okay, everybody, we want to get a briefing in and get some job assignments.
Early the next morning, at the La Crosse Police Department, investigators compared the information they gathered so far. Detective Joe Dunham was one of the lead investigators on the case.
Now, the coroner thought it was a gunshot, but then he determined later it was a blunt instrument to the head that killed Mr. Harmachek. There's a footprint on the east side of the house in the snow.
Detectives also needed to follow up on the most promising clue so far, the footprint left in the back of the house. At the crime scene, technicians arrived to make a cast of the frozen shoe print. The snow's hardened crystalline structure captured the most intricate detail. But it had to be handled carefully so as not to destroy the print. Before a cast was attempted, the shoe print was photographed, just in case. Hot sulfur, which solidifies on contact with the cold snow, was used as the casting medium. The sulfur hardens almost instantly, ensuring the snow does not melt before the cast is created. It recorded every groove and pattern of the shoe print. The newly formed cast was sent to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. Inside the house, blood spatter stained the furniture and the surrounding floor. Forensic scientist Nick Stalkey reconstructed the fatal scenario.
The stains that were on the front of this chest of drawers were 2 to 6 millimeters in size. Those are indicative of stains that you would see at a beating or a stabbing.
He stretched pieces of string back from the blood spatter to determine the position of the victim at the moment of the attack.
By the point of convergence of the blood stains, I was able to determine that Mr. Harmachek was beaten just in front of this chest of drawers. We did find a hammer that was in the area of these blood stains.
The chest of drawers and the hammer were sent to the crime lab for analysis. A La Crosse police officer spoke with Shirley Otto, the victim's longtime companion.
So right now you can't think of anybody that would want to do any harm to him?
She and Donald Harmachek had been together for over 20 years.
No.
She told the officer they had a good relationship, that Donald was well-liked, and everyone called him by his nickname, Pops. Shirley also told the officer that Donald had been upset recently because his house had been repeatedly burglarized. La Crosse police detectives Joe Dunham and Brad Berkey looked into police reports and arrest records involving burglaries of the Harmachek residence. They found no shortage of names. It appeared perpetrators considered Donald Harmachek an easy mark.
He was someone that we knew kept money in his residence, and he had been targeted in the past by various burglars.
Police went to question a known local petty thief named Adam Tallbridge. But when he heard the police, he ran. Tallbridge looked like a promising suspect. Back Back at the station, he denied any involvement with the Harmasic homicide. Tallbridge claimed he panicked when he heard the police. That is why he ran. He agreed to cooperate and allowed his tennis shoes to be tested. They were sent out for analysis to the state crime lab, where forensic scientist Jerry Kotajarvi was analyzing the footprint casts from the crime scene.
There are a lot of shoes that have the same size and tread design, but it's the unique characteristics that identifies that shoe to that impression.
He determined that the footwear worn at the scene was an Airwalk tennis shoe, the same type worn by Tallbridge. But when he compared the casts to the sneakers, he found the shoes were the wrong size. Adam Tallbridge was not their man. Then Kotajarvi discovered something unusual. There were actually two separate and distinct shoe prints, one on top of the other. He concluded they were now looking for two suspects, not one. Investigators still had no idea who killed Donald Harmasic, and they faced an even greater challenge. They were now looking for two suspects, and their hope was that the newly discovered shoe prints would lead them straight to the killers.
What is this?
The office, it gives me the boost to power through my workout. It works for me.
The first tastes great. The garbage who have diabetes.
Best of
Tomorrow on an True Crime with Aphrodite Jones. Tomorrow at 10 on Investigation Discovery.
64-year-old Donald Harmasic was murdered and his house set on fire to cover up the crime. Investigators discovered they were now searching for two suspects, but so far the crime scene yielded a limited number of clues, and detectives Brad Berkey and Joe Dunham were frustrated.
When you burn a body, you take a lot of evidence with it, and also when you burn the home, you take a lot of evidence there.
At the crime lab, forensic scientists continued their investigation. Nick Stolke studied the victim's blood-spattered cabinet. Soot marks and spatter indicated that one of the drawers was partially open at the time of the murder. The chest of drawers provided Nick Stolke with important information.
The individual was beaten just in front of this chest of drawers, and then the drawers were repositioned, and then the fire started. It told us then that not only did the individuals beat the victim, but they also then ransacked the house after he was down and bleeding, and then started the fire and left.
At the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, forensic scientist Ken Olson tested debris from the burned house. He believed a flammable liquid was used to start the blaze.
It's very difficult to just take materials that are present to start a fire. But with an ignitable liquid, you can accelerate that fire and get it going faster.
Liquid accelerants leave traces behind that slowly evaporate. The debris collected was placed inside a can along with a carbon strip. Carbon absorbs any traces of the accelerant left behind. The can is sealed and then heated to 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
I then take that paint can with the charcoal strip inside, place it into the oven.
After heating for 16 hours, the carbon strip is then put into a gas chromatograph that analyzes the chemical components of the accelerant.
I take that vial and put it on the instrument, and it's automated, injects the solvent into the instrument, and I'm looking for any known accelerants
molecular fingerprint. The chromatograph reveals that molecular structure.
I examined the residues that I recovered and found residues of gasoline in 3 of the samples that were collected from the scene.
Investigators turned to the community, and they set up a Crime Solvers tip line. The leads began to pour in. One of the callers claimed a man named Todd Carpenter knew something about the murder. Detectives brought Carpenter in for questioning. He began to spell out his involvement, telling investigators he was contacted by 2 men.
He was approached by Nathan Lindell and Josh Lindell, and he was a driver, and they were just going there for a burglary.
According to Carpenter, the Lindell brothers heard a rumor that Donald Harmasic kept lots of cash in his house, and they wanted it. The brothers offered Carpenter money to drive the getaway car. Carpenter told the detectives he stayed with the car while Nathaniel and Josh Lindell committed the burglary.
We waited outside while Josh and Nathan Lindell went inside the residence looking for money and rummaged around the basement and went upstairs looking for money. And at that time, they stumbled across Donald Harmachek.
Afterwards, the brothers instructed him to drive to the top of Grandad Bluff, a secluded spot overlooking the city of La Crosse. There, they built a fire and burned the clothes they had been wearing, including their shoes. Carpenter was surprised when Nathaniel told him the man inside the house was, quote, toast by now. Carpenter said he got nervous when he heard about the murder on the news the next day. Investigators began to believe Carpenter, but they had no concrete evidence to back up his story. In the hopes of getting some, detectives convinced him to wear a wire. Maybe they could catch Nathaniel incriminating himself. Carpenter went to see Nathaniel. He told him the police were asking a lot of questions. He said he was scared. He didn't know what to do or say.
They just come by my work asking me all kinds of questions, about who I would live and who I am.
Nathaniel played it cool. He indicated knowledge of the crime, but said nothing that could actually incriminate himself.
He was telling me, to stay cool and just, don't tell them anything, and that those SOBs, they ain't gonna get nothing out of me.
They were convinced Nathaniel Lindell was the mastermind. But the wired conversation was no proof. Since Carpenter couldn't help them anymore, detectives hoped Josh Lindell could.
He did agree to speak with us, and that surprised me. His initial statement to us, he took the blame.
Detectives finally got the break they needed. But the extreme violence of the crime and their strongest piece of evidence, the shoe prints, pointed to 2 killers. Detectives knew they needed more if they were to catch them both.
Program is intended for mature audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
La Crosse, Wisconsin detectives were deep in the middle of the arson murder investigation of 64-year-old Donald Harmasic. The footprints found in the snow led investigators to 2 suspects, the Lindell brothers. Detectives Joe Dunham and Brad Berkey had placed Josh Lindell in custody. Although he claimed he acted alone, the detectives knew differently. Detective Brad Berkey hoped Josh would give up his brother.
I believed that he was involved, But I never expected him in the interview to tell us that he was the one that did. I fully expected him to tell us that his brother was more involved than he was, and that surprised me.
Josh appeared nervous. He said he had never been in trouble with the law. And after hours of questioning, Josh Lindell finally admitted the whole story. He said he and Nathaniel broke in through the basement window, stepping on each other's footprints to obscure their track and to throw off police. They found Donald Harmasic asleep on the couch and panicked. He said his brother Nathan also repeatedly struck the victim in the head with a hammer and left him for dead. Then they set the house on fire to cover up their crime. After Josh's confession, investigators had what they needed to bring in Nathaniel for breaking and entering, arson, and the murder of Donald Harmasic. They arrested him at the apartment he shared with his roommate.
Squad car, if we search it yet, we get down to the police station and we'll...
He was handcuffed and taken to the police station where he was booked. Detectives also came armed with a search warrant. They questioned Nathaniel's roommate and searched for evidence. Even though Josh said they burned the shoes they wore, investigators collected another pair at his apartment. At the State Crime Lab, the shoes confiscated from Nathaniel were determined to be Airwalks, the same style and tread design of the shoe print caps. Although not an exact match, the wear pattern was uniquely similar to those worn at the crime scene. Despite the evidence against him and the fact that both Todd Carpenter and his own brother Josh incriminated him, Nathaniel Lindell refused to talk. Based on the evidence, police determined that Nathaniel and Josh Lindell broke into Donald Harmasic's home, intending to burglarize it. Josh was surprised to find the homeowner asleep on the sofa. Harmasic began to stir. Josh panicked. Nathaniel then struck him with the hammer he'd used to break the basement window, leaving him unconscious. On their way out, the brothers took the money from the victim's wallet. They set the house on fire to cover up the murder. They then carefully stepped in each other's footprints, hoping to fool the authorities. It didn't turn out that way.
I believe Josh was definitely part of the crime, but he was not the leader of the group. It was Nathan Lindell, his older brother, that was the leader.
On February 3rd, 1998, Nathaniel Lindell was convicted of first-degree murder, burglary, and arson. He was sentenced to life in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 50 years. His brother, Josh Lindell, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life. He will be eligible for parole in 25 years. In exchange for his testimony, Todd Carpenter was not charged. La Crosse homicide detectives narrowed in on one piece of forensic evidence, yielding two suspects who used arson to hide their crime.